So we might ask the question, because philosophy or wisdom as it's defined typically in the ancient texts at least, and this at least goes back to Aristotle, is that wisdom is of two sorts. There's theoretical wisdom, which the Greeks translates in ancient Greek as Sophia. And then there's practical wisdom, which in ancient Greek translates as phronesis. And theoretical wisdom is the kind of wisdom that we use when we engage in more abstract thinking, that we use when we engage, for example, in logical thinking. When we logical inference, for instance, when we infer, you think of the rules of logic. If A, then B. So if A is the case, then B is the case. So if all human beings are mortal, Socrates is mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal, right? And so that's one instance.
I think we missed it. So yeah, if all human beings are mortal, and Socrates is a human being, then Socrates is mortal. I think we said mortal twice there.
Right.
Yeah, just to clip. Yeah,
I skipped a step there.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks for the correction there.
But I think everyone probably knows what you mean by that.
Yeah. Yeah. If Socrates is a human being, no, all human beings are mortal.
Yeah.
Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal.
Correct. Yeah.
So symbolically, we translate that as if A, then B, A, then B, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's just logical inference. We also engage in theoretical wisdom when we try to understand cause and effect. So we're trying to understand, if we're a cosmologist, we're trying to understand how the universe began. Well, we might theorize about what were the causes of the universe, and what was the effect of those causes, and so or it can be something more simple, like if I put my hand in the fire, then that causes pain. So it's an inferential way of thinking. More abstractly, we can, when we're doing things like trying to understand a mathematical theorem, like the Pythagorean theorem, or if we're trying to understand physical laws of the universe, like the law of conservation of matter, we're applying our theoretical wisdom in that sense. And we're engaging in theoretical thinking, which, to the ancient Greeks, they understood that's what they called theoretical nous translating just as cognition or thinking. And so I guess there's questions we can ask about this. So that's theoretical wisdom, right? And then there is practical wisdom. So practical wisdom is, I'd say it's a combination of theoretical and more pragmatic thinking. And so, I might know that exercise is good for me, and that exercise builds muscles, and that exercise releases endorphins, leads me to feeling good in body and mind, and thereby gratifies my physiological needs, my psychological needs, and so on and so forth. So that's practical wisdom in part, but it's also knowing how to exercise. It's knowing the proper weightlifting techniques, for instance. It's knowing the proper way of running if I'm a runner. It's knowing the proper way of doing a yoga posture or performing a form in Tai Chi or something along those lines. Or being an effective painter or being an effective gardener or landscaper. So it seems like a combination of knowing that something is the case and knowing how to do that. And so so we might want to just ask the question: do we think theoretical and practical wisdom are fundamentally separate categories of wisdom? Is there some overlap? Do they kind of, exist on a continuum? What are our views there?
Yeah, I think the idea of a continuum is good. I think in a way, the two help inform one another in a certain sense. I think of theoretical wisdom as thinking about principles. Um, you know, uh, Kind of what you're getting at with uh, they sort of inform what you want to accomplish in a certain way, and uh, I think practical wisdom kind of allows you to work that into some sort of techne in a form of phronesis. So I don't know if you want to maybe elaborate on the difference between techne and phronesis. I'm not sure if we've done that yet. Um,
Sure, we can briefly. I mean, they're not. I mean, I think techne might be a particular facet of phronesis. Phronesis is just practical reason, and practical reason translates as prudence. Prudence is in part, prudence is knowing what's good for you. It's the ability to make good practical decisions for yourself, and perhaps for others as well. And techne is a particular skill that you have, that relates to a particular activity. So the skill of a painter, or the skill of a landscaper, or the skill of a debater. And so I think that, the craft is a particular, maybe instantiation of prudence, like a particular activity in which prudence manifests itself. And so,
yeah, I think practical wisdom is sort of the marriage of sort of theoretical wisdom. Sort of, practical wisdom is sort of a marriage of theoretical wisdom and a craft or techne in a certain sense. So again, going back to that sort of continuum, um, you know, you you're trying to accomplish a goal, but you're trying to do so in a prudent way, in a way that adheres to certain principles. So we talk about justice, for instance. Um, we want people to be accountable for their actions, but we can't uh, do that. Say, in the Western world, we have the concept of innocent until proven guilty.
right.
I think that's sort of a theoretical sort of form of wisdom. Um, and if we're trying to achieve justice, if you're, a judge trying to decide on the guilt of somebody, your craft is being a judge. In order to have sort of practical wisdom, you have to keep these theoretical concepts. You have to have sort of this theoretical wisdom and these theoretical principles in mind when you're trying to do your craft, and that will give you, a sort of practical wisdom, a particular instantiation of wisdom. I think theoretical wisdom is definitely more general. It's definitely more abstract. But being able to take these abstract concepts and work them into a craft, that's what gives you practical wisdom. So I think philosophy is really trying to develop this theoretical wisdom so that it can be used maybe by yourself or by other people in a particular area, and so that they can become more wise in a practical or pragmatic sense.
Right, right. Yeah, well, I think that's all well stated. I mean, it almost, in a sense, it almost seems as if we translate our theoretical wisdom into practical wisdom, and maybe vice versa. If you're a painter, for example, theoretically, you become acquainted with certain, say, principles, I guess, upon which an effective painter relies upon in painting. Say if you're a Van Gogh or you're a classical Renaissance painter or something, there's certain elements and principles of composition in painting that painting, things like contrast and having certain things in the foreground, certain things in the background, certain things more dominant, other things less dominant. You know, if you're just a commercial painter, you're painting walls and ceilings and stuff. I mean, this kind of speaks to your experience. I'm sure there are certain principles upon which, characterize proper painting technique in that sense, right? And as a landscaper, there are certain principles that are involved in landscaping, certain ways of, trimming grasses and branches and so on and so forth. And so that's sort of a theoretical knowing that something is the case, right? But it also relies upon a more pragmatic knowing how to do those things too. The painter just through habit has internalized the principles and is able to apply the principles without necessarily consciously thinking about them, but they more or less have woven themselves into the painter's painting repertoire, the painter's behavioral repertoire. So more or less just comes naturally and spontaneously without any conscious effort at all.
I think that's really relevant in the development of techniques. Like I don't think Van Gogh or Picasso or whatever was relying on theory per se when, so much theory when they came up with their techniques. But as someone who now, say you want to be someone, a surrealist, in the case of Picasso or something like that. I think he's in the surrealist tradition.
I believe he was a cubist. I think
a cubist.
Salvador Dali was the surrealist.
Surrealist, sure, okay.
Watches and all that.
Yeah, and as someone who studies that, I think you get acquainted with the theory first, and that helps you develop sort of the techne and the practical wisdom. And also, I think too, what theoretical wisdom you rely on depends on where you sit with your craft, with your techne. What tools do you have at your disposal? Like what physical tools, what skills you have will inform what theory you're going to rely on. Sometimes, as a painter, as a painter of houses and things like that, sometimes you don't have all the tools you want, and you're not going to be able to do it in the ideal theoretical way that it would, ideally be done. But there still are theoretical concepts that you can rely on to accomplish your goal. So I think what theories you come up with, what principles you end up applying, are sometimes informed by your techne in a certain sense. Again, what tools you have at your disposal, and that kind of helps develop, say on a job site, what is the practical wisdom here? It might not apply on the next job. It may or may not. But here at this job site, this is the practical wisdom that we're going to rely on to get the job done, and that's informed by the people, their techne, their craft, and the relevant theories that relate to that.
Right. No, I think that's all very well stated. I mean, I feel like thinking of, there's a quote from Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian philosopher of the media, something to the effect of, first we shape our technologies, and then our technologies shape us. Mm-hmm. And so, there's this continual reciprocal causal interaction between our tools and the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act. There's this reciprocal interaction between our technologies on the one hand and the way we think about, um, you know, reality at large, how we think about how to best proceed in achieving a certain goal. These are all shaped by the technologies at our disposal. And so, if we rewind in history back to ancient Greece, they were, for transmitting knowledge, for instance, they were limited to the papyrus scroll, right? And this was probably a long, laborious process to copy down abstract ideas onto these scrolls and then to read them and to study them and to transmit them from person to person through the generations. Then in like the Middle Ages, we had Gutenberg who came around, and he invented the printing press. And suddenly, we could mass produce knowledge at a quicker rate, and we could, I guess, that probably sped up knowledge acquisition and facilitated learning a lot more than it did with the papyrus scroll, given how cumbersome that must have been to have learned that way through reading these papyrus scrolls. Imagine like lugging these huge papyrus scrolls around, trying to read the fine print and roll these things out and put them away. And I definitely be deterred from learning in those technological conditions. But then so after the Gutenberg press came along the electronic media, the internet, and now we can basically transmit information nearly at an instant, and it's kind of fascinating time period we're living in, frankly, because the ability to acquire knowledge just seems to be accelerating, and this is shaping the way we perceive the world. This is shaping the way we think about the world. This is shaping the way we act in the world, and so I think your point is spot on in that sense. And I think just to further elucidate and elaborate on this, I think that I think it's a useful distinction insofar as it explains why and how human beings think and feel and act. And theoretical wisdom kind of accounts for how people develop knowledge in order to understand how reality works, and so that they can know cause and effect. And from a naturalistic and evolutionary point of view, this makes a lot of sense. It has adaptive value. Knowing that putting my hand into the fire causes me excruciating pain, was no doubt a useful generalization, the useful principle of cause and effect. And no doubt it helped my ancestors, no doubt that it helps me, no doubt that it'll help my posterity. And so in that sense, yes, I agree with this construct, this construct of theoretical wisdom for those reasons. I also agree with the construct of practical wisdom for somewhat similar reasons. Like I said, knowing that exercise is good for me, that it builds muscles, that it increases endorphins, that it increases mood, and so on and so forth, and that I know how to exercise using the proper techniques. These are all things that have adaptive significance. And so, yes, I agree. I agree to these constructs. I agree to this way of understanding wisdom. Now, there's this question we need to ask. This is a central question: are theoretical wisdom and practical wisdom mutually exclusive, right? And in my view, these are my reflections. And I think the German poet, scientist, and philosopher Goethe summed it up aptly when he said, "In the beginning was the deed." And this is from his famous play Faust. And I guess such a statement gets to this notion that our knowledge of how something is done precedes our knowledge of why certain things are the way they are. So, first and foremost, we are beings and we are actors in the world, and only maybe secondarily, thinkers and philosophers who think about the world and the nature of reality and so on and so forth. So it seems to be there might be some primacy there might be some primacy to practical wisdom. And that maybe that comes from a developmental and evolutionary perspective, maybe that comes first. And then we come to develop a more theoretical understanding of the universe. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Think of primitive man, for instance, our hunter-gatherer ancestors. I think for them in the beginning would have been the deed, right? In the beginning would have been, knowing how to spear a saber-toothed tiger or the antelope on the savannah for to avoid getting killed or for acquiring meat for sustenance. And only secondarily did we understand that that certain cause-effect relationships were in place. So, for example,
we come to an understanding of why that worked, why hunting, hunting a certain animal in a certain way, why that was efficient, by reflecting on those things. I definitely am more inclined to that, and it kind of turns the sort of Christian idea of, first there was the word on its head. And yeah, I'm definitely more inclined to that disposition of, first we know how to do something. We figure out how to do it, and then we through observation, we learn why things are done in a certain way.